The pot lid rattled once, then settled, and Lian's owl lifted it just enough to let the steam curl free into the July morning before anyone in the Sweetwater market caught the scent of star anise and soy drifting down Main Street. She was 28 years old, a widow of 2 years, and she had learned that in this town, Wyoming Territory, a woman selling food from a folding table earned exactly as much respect as the food itself, and not 1 ounce more. The market ran the length of Main Street every Tuesday and Friday. Wagons backed up against the boardwalk, crates of onions and salt pork and bolts of cloth laid out under canvas awnings that did little against the summer heat. Leanne's table sat at the far end, past the leather goods and the seed corn, because that was the spot nobody else wanted, and the only spot she had ever been offered. She did not complain about it. She had learned that complaining bought her nothing but a longer walk home. She had 2 iron pots going that morning, one with pork shoulder braised slow since before sunrise, the other with rice steaming under a heavy lid, and the smell of star anise and soy had drawn exactly as many curious glances as it had turned away customers who did not trust a dish they could not name. That was the arithmetic of her life now. Some days the curious outnumbered the wary. Some days they did not. Her husband, Winsow, had died on the rail grade 2 winters back, crushed under a slide of loose shale that the foreman had been warned about and ignored, and the railroad company had paid her exactly $40 for the loss of him, which she had used to buy the pots she cooked with now. She did not think about that transaction more than she had to. Thinking about it did not put food in the pots. She had come west with Win from San Francisco 4 years earlier, following the rail work the way so many families did, and when the shale came down on him she had faced the particular arithmetic that fell to widows in the territory. She could go back to San Francisco and live crowded into a room with cousins who owed her nothing, or she could stay in Sweetwater and make something of the little Win had left behind. She had chosen to stay, not out of sentiment for the town, which had given her precious little reason to love it, but because she had learned that a woman who kept moving never got the chance to build anything that belonged only to her. The 2 iron pots and the folding table were hers outright, bought with her own money, and no man in Sweetwater could take that fact away from her, no matter how loudly he complained about the smell of star anise drifting down Main Street. The morning routine never changed. She rose before the sun to start the pork, because meat done right needed hours she could not spare once the market opened, and she carried the pots down from her small house at the edge of town in a hand cart Win had built her the summer before he died, its wheel still slightly bent from a rock it had struck years ago and never quite recovered from. She kept meaning to fix the wheel. She never did. There was something in the small, familiar creak of it that she was not ready to lose. 2 bowls, said a woman in a gray dress, setting down her coins without meeting Leanne's eyes, and Leanne ladled the pork over the rice and handed the bowls across without comment, because comment was a luxury she had stopped affording herself months ago. That was when the shadow fell across her table long enough that she looked up. The man was tall in the particular way that made a body step back before deciding whether to, his coat gray with trail dust, and his hat pulled low enough that she had to tilt her head to find his eyes. He was studying her pots the way a man studies a horse he is thinking of buying, careful and unhurried, and when he finally spoke, his voice was rough from disuse rather than unkindness. "What is that?" he said, nodding at the pork. "Food," Leanne said. 10 cents a bowl." Something that was almost a smile moved across his face and did not quite land. "Didn't doubt it was food, wondered what kind. Pork, rice, my grandmother's way of making it." She held his gaze because she had learned that dropping her eyes only invited more of whatever a man wanted to take from her. And this man did not look like he wanted to take anything. Not yet. Not that she could read. You want a bowl, or you want a conversation? I only sell one of those. That did land the smile, brief and real. He set down a dime. His name, she would learn before the day was through, was Ezra Colt, and he had ridden into Sweetwater 3 days earlier with nothing but a horse, a rifle, and a reputation that traveled a half day ahead of him wherever he went. The kind of reputation that made grown men find urgent business elsewhere when he walked into a room. He ate the pork and rice standing at the corner of her table, and when he finished, he did not say a word about it, only set the empty bowl down with a care that told her more than a compliment would have, and walked away toward the saloon without looking back once. The stable hand who worked the livery across the street, a talkative young man named Silas, who traded gossip for bowls of rice more often than he paid coin, sidled up to her table not 10 minutes after Ezra had gone. You know who that was, Silas said, low, like the words themselves might carry weight enough to hurt someone. A man who paid for his food and didn't complain about the price, Leanne said, wiping down her ladle. That's Ezra Colt. Rode with the Hale outfit down in the Nations for a spell, from what I heard. Man like that don't stop through Sweetwater for the scenery. Man like that ate my cooking and left a dime on the table, Leanne said. That's the whole of what I know about him, and it's the whole of what I need to. Silas looked unconvinced, the way young men often looked when a woman refused to be as alarmed as they thought she ought to be. But he let it go, and Leanne went back to ladling out bowls to the steady trickle of customers who did not care one way or another whose reputation had passed through town that morning. She had learned, in 2 years of running her table alone, that the surest way to keep her footing in Sweetwater was to let other people's fear belong to them, and not borrow it for herself. She would have thought no more of him, filed him away with the 100 other strangers who passed through Sweetwater and vanished, except that he came back on Friday. And Friday was the day that everything at the market went wrong before it went anywhere else. It started with Otis Vance, who ran the dry goods store on the corner, and had appointed himself, by virtue of no authority anyone had ever granted him, the arbiter of who belonged in Sweetwater's market and who did not. He came down the row of tables that Friday morning with 2 of his hired men trailing him, and Leanne knew, the way she always knew, by the set of his shoulders and the particular slowness of his walk, that he had decided today was the day he intended to make trouble for her. You're taking up space that belongs to a decent business, Vance said, stopping in front of her table with his thumbs hooked in his belt. Folks in this town don't take kindly to eating food they can't recognize, cooked by someone who don't belong here in the first place. I've sold from this table 2 years, Leanne said, her hands steady on the ladle even as her stomach went tight. Same spot, same days. Nobody's complained but you. I'm complaining now. Vance's voice carried, deliberately, the way a man's voice carries when he wants an audience and intends to get one. A small crowd had already begun to gather, the way crowds gathered in small towns whenever the air changed. This is a decent town. We don't need your kind setting up shop where honest folks do their trading. The words landed the way they were meant to land, and Leanne felt heat rise in her face that had nothing to do with the cook fire, but she did not look away from him, and she did not raise her voice either. I pay the same table fee as every other vendor on this street, she said. You want me gone? Take it up with the town council. Until then, I'm selling food, same as you're selling nails. Vance's jaw tightened, and one of his men shifted his weight in a way that suggested this was about to stop being only words, and that was the moment Ezra Colt stepped out from the crowd that had gathered to watch, unhurried, the way he seemed to do everything. Heard you say something about honest folks, Ezra said, and though his voice was quiet, it carried in a way that made the whole street go still. Funny thing to hear from a man who waters down his flour with sawdust. I found that out my second day in town, matter of fact, from a fellow who bought a sack off you and found it out the hard way." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, and Vance's face went a shade darker. "This isn't your business, stranger." "Made it my business the day I ate a good meal off this table, and nobody else in this town had the decency to sell me one worth eating," Ezra said, and he stepped up beside Leanne's table, close enough that his shoulder nearly touched hers, close enough that Vance's men clearly reconsidered whatever they had been about to do. "Now, you want to keep talking about who belongs in this market, or you want to let the lady get back to her cooking?" Vance looked between Ezra and the gathered crowd, doing the particular arithmetic that men like him always did in moments like this, weighing his pride against the growing certainty that he had misjudged the room, and after a long moment he spat into the dust and turned away, muttering something about troublemakers that nobody bothered to answer. The crowd dispersed slowly, the way crowds do when the show is over, and Leanne let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "You didn't need to do that," she said. "No," Ezra agreed. "Didn't need to. Wanted to." She studied him for a long moment, this stranger with the reputation that traveled ahead of him, and the quiet way he had of standing between danger and someone he barely knew. "Why?" He did not answer right away, and when he did, his voice had dropped to something rougher, something that sounded like a man admitting a thing he had not planned to admit. "Been a long time since anybody cooked me something and didn't want anything back for it. Man starts to notice that kind of thing after a while." That was the moment the day tilted into something neither of them had planned for, though Leanne would not understand the full shape of it until much later. He came back every market day after that, always to her table, always the same order, and though the town's tongues wagged about what business a man like Ezra Colt had lingering at a widow's cook table, neither of them gave the tongues much satisfaction. He ate, he paid, he talked a little more each time, and the talking revealed a man far more careful with his words than his reputation suggested, a man who chose each sentence like it cost him something to spend it. One Friday, arriving later than usual, he found her struggling alone to lift a full pot of rice from the handcart to the table, the bent wheel having finally given out somewhere between her house and Main Street, and without a word he set down the sack he was carrying and took the other side of the pot, lifting it level with her so the rice would not spill. "Didn't ask for help," Leanne said, though there was no sharpness in it. "Didn't wait to be asked," Ezra said. "Man who waits to be asked usually arrives too late to matter." She studied him over the steaming pot, this stranger who noticed a bent wheel and a struggling widow before anyone else in the market had looked up from their own business. "You notice things most folks walk right past." "It's been a long stretch of my life needing to notice things quick, or not living long enough to notice much else," he said, setting the pot down with more care than the task strictly required. "Habit doesn't leave a man just because the reason for it did." "And what was the reason?" she asked. He was quiet long enough that she thought he would not answer at all. "Staying alive," he said finally. "Some days that was the whole of it." She did not push further, though the answer sat with her the rest of the afternoon, turning over in her mind between customers the way a stone turns over in a creek bed, worn smooth by the current, but never quite disappearing. She learned, in pieces, that he had ridden with a group of men some years back, whose business had not been honest, that he had left that life behind hard and fast after something happened he would not name outright, and that he had come to Sweetwater not for any particular reason, except that it was as good a place as any to stop running from what he had been. "You don't ask why I don't say more than that," he observed one Friday, watching her work the ladle with the same careful attention he gave everything. Figure a man tells you what he wants you to know when he's ready, Leanne said. Pushing don't make it come faster, just makes him leave sooner. Something shifted behind his eyes, something that looked almost like relief. Most folks push. I'm not most folks. No, he said, quiet. I'd noticed that. It was 3 weeks into this new rhythm, the two of them settling into something neither had named, when the second and larger trouble arrived in Sweetwater, and it arrived on horseback, 4 riders coming in slow off the eastern road, with the particular unhurried confidence of men who believed the town already belonged to them. Leanne did not know their names, not at first, but she knew the look of them, the same look Ezra had worn the day he rode in, except colder, and she watched from her table as the 4 riders drew up in front of the saloon, and one of them, a heavy-set man with a scar cutting through his beard, called out a name into the street. "Colt!" the man shouted, loud enough to carry the length of Main Street. "Ezra Colt! Come on out! We know you're here!" The street emptied the way streets empty in small towns when trouble arrives. Shopkeepers pulling in their signs, women drawing children back through doorways, and Leanne found herself standing alone at her table with her pot still steaming, watching the door of the saloon where Ezra had been sitting not 10 minutes earlier. He came out slow, hands loose at his sides, and something in his walk had changed entirely from the careful, quiet man who ate at her table twice a week. This was a different version of him, the version the reputation had always described, and watching it, Leanne understood for the first time exactly how much danger had been standing 3 feet from her table all this time. "Boone," Ezra said, naming the scarred man. "Didn't figure you'd ride this far for an old debt." "Wasn't a debt," Boone said. "Was a promise. You took something that belonged to my brother when you left, and my brother don't forget easy." "Your brother's dead," Ezra said, flat. "I didn't take anything that wasn't already owed to me twice over." "That's not how he saw it," Boone said, and his hand drifted, unhurried, toward the pistol at his hip. "And now it's not how I see it either." What happened next moved fast enough that Leanne would only piece it together afterward, in fragments. Boone's hand closing around his pistol grip, Ezra already moving, already drawing, the two of them a blur of motion that ended in a single shot that took Boone through the shoulder and sent him staggering back against the hitching post. The other 3 riders had their weapons half raised before Ezra's voice cut across the street, low and final. "Next one doesn't miss," he said, and something in the way he said it, utterly without heat, made all 3 men go still. It was Leanne who moved first, before she had fully decided to, crossing the street with her heart hammering and dropping to her knees beside Boone where he had slid down against the post, pressing her apron hard against the wound in his shoulder, because whatever quarrel these men carried, she was not about to watch a man bleed out in the street in front of her. "Get back," Boone gasped, more startled than threatening. "Hold still or you'll lose more blood arguing with me than you already have," Leanne said, and something in her flat, practical tone seemed to cut through his shock enough that he obeyed. The other 3 riders, watching a woman they had never met tending their fallen companion, while Ezra Colt stood 10 feet away with a still smoking pistol, seemed to lose whatever appetite they had left for the fight. One of them finally spoke, quieter than Boone had. "This ain't over, Colt." "Wasn't looking to start it today," Ezra said. "Wasn't looking to finish it either. Your call which one it becomes." They left within the hour, taking Boone with them, propped in his saddle and cursing under his breath the whole way out of town, and the street slowly filled back in with the ordinary business of a Friday afternoon, though the talk that followed carried a different weight now, less about whether Leanne Zhao belonged at her table, and more about what exactly had ridden into Sweetwater alongside her most loyal customer. That evening, after the market had closed and the last of her pots sat cooling, Ezra found her packing up her table alone, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked less like a man with a reputation and more like a man carrying something heavy enough to bend a spine. "I should go," he said. "Boone's brother didn't forget easy, and neither will Boone. They'll be back, and next time it won't be 4 men asking polite." "You've been telling yourself leaving is the safest thing to do for a long time now, I'd guess," Leanne said, not looking up from the pot she was scrubbing. "Doesn't mean it's true." "I put your table in danger today. Whole street." "You put a bullet in a man who was about to put one in you," Leanne said. "I've buried a husband, Mr. Colt. I know the difference between a man who brings danger and a man who stands between me and it." He was quiet for a long moment, watching her work, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something rawer than she had heard from him before. There was, Leanne noticed, a particular stillness that settled over him whenever he approached something true, as though the truth itself required a kind of bracing most men never had to learn. "There was a woman, back before all this, before I left that life. I told myself I was protecting her by staying quiet about what I was. She found out anyway, the hard way, and she paid for knowing me with more than she should have had to." "How did she find out?" "Man I'd wronged came looking for me and found her instead," he said. "Held a knife to her before I got there in time to stop it. She wasn't hurt bad, not in the way that shows, but she looked at me different after that, and she had every right to." "That's not the same as what happened today," Leanne said. "Boone came looking for you, and I chose to stand where I stood. Nobody held anything to my throat while I stood there. I picked it." "Doesn't make it less dangerous for you." "No," she agreed, "but it makes it mine to carry, same as it's yours. You don't get to decide I can't carry my own weight just because you're used to carrying everyone's alone." "I don't know how to have something good without watching it get taken from me," he said. "Every time I have, it's ended in a street like the one out there." "Then let's find out together whether this time's different," Leanne said. "I didn't survive burying a husband and building this table from nothing just to hand my life over to fear now." He did not kiss her that night, though something passed between them that felt like a promise, deeper than a kiss might have been. A decision made in the quiet of her small kitchen that neither of them said aloud, but both understood plainly. The trouble came back 9 days later, and it came back the way Ezra had warned it would. Not 4 men asking polite, but 6, riding in before dawn with Boone at the front of them, his shoulder bandaged and his face set with the particular hard patience of a man who had spent the intervening days planning rather than cooling off. Leanne woke to the sound of horses in the street and found Ezra already at her door, rifle in hand, his face grim in the gray pre-dawn light. "They're at the edge of town," he said. "I need you to get somewhere safe." "Where's safe?" Leanne said. "The market's my table. This is my home. I'm not running from either one." He looked at her like he wanted to argue, and knew already that arguing would cost him time he did not have. "Then stay behind me, and if I tell you to move, you move." What followed was the longest hour of Leanne's life. The town waking slowly to gunfire in the street, shopkeepers barricading doors, the marshal, a cautious man named Otis Pruitt, who had avoided involving himself in Ezra's troubles until this exact moment, finally strapping on his own weapon and stepping into the fray once the danger threatened the whole of Main Street rather than one man alone. Leanne did not stay behind cover the way Ezra had asked, not entirely. When she saw one of Boone's men circling behind the feed store toward the spot where Ezra crouched, unseen and unaware of the flanking movement, she grabbed the iron skillet from her own stovetop, still hot from breakfast, and swung it hard enough to drop the man before he ever got his shot off. The clang of metal against skull, the loudest sound she had made in 2 years of quiet grief. Ezra turned at the noise, saw the man crumpled at her feet, and something crossed his face that was not quite shock and not quite relief, but some tangled version of both. "Told you to stay behind cover," he said, breathless. "I did," Leanne said. "Behind the feed store. Man just happened to be between me and it." The fight ended 20 minutes later, with Boone himself facing Ezra alone in the middle of Main Street, both men's weapons drawn, the whole town holding its breath from behind shuttered windows. And it was Ezra's steadier hand and Boone's still healing shoulder that decided the outcome. A single shot that ended the standoff without ending Boone's life, dropping him to his knees in the dust with his gun hand ruined, and his fight finally fully spent. "Your brother's debt dies here," Ezra told him, standing over him in the settling dust. "You want to keep chasing it? You'll find me. But you'll find her standing beside me every time. And she's proven today she's not somebody you want standing against you." Boone, beaten and bleeding, said nothing, and when the marshal's men led him away toward the territorial jail 2 towns over, something in Sweetwater's air finally, truly settled. The night after the fight, once the marshal's men had ridden out with Boone and the street had gone quiet again, Ezra found Leanne sitting alone on the step behind her house, the bent, wheeled handcart resting against the wall beside her, and he sat down next to her without asking permission, close enough that his shoulder rested against hers the way it had at the market table the day everything began. "You could have been killed today," he said. "That skillet bought you maybe 2 seconds of surprise. Man could have turned before you swung." "He didn't," Leanne said. "And I'm not in the habit of measuring my choices against what could have gone wrong instead of what did." "I keep waiting to feel steadier about all this," he admitted, turning the words over slow, the way he did with anything true. "Keep thinking one day I'll wake up and the waiting for the next Boone won't sit in my chest the way it does now." "Maybe it doesn't go away," Leanne said. "Maybe you just get better at carrying it. I still wake up some mornings expecting to hear Win in the next room before I remember. 2 years on and it still happens. I've stopped waiting for it to stop." He was quiet at that, watching the last light fail over the rooftops of Sweetwater, and after a while he reached over and took her hand where it rested on the step between them, not asking, simply doing it, the way a man does a thing he has decided is worth the risk of being refused. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Wanted you to hear me say it plain, not just watch me stay and guess at the reason." "I heard you," Leanne said, and did not pull her hand away. They sat like that until the stars came out fully over the plains, saying little else, because both of them had learned, in their own ways and their own losses, that the truest things did not always need more words spent on them once they had already been said once, honestly, in the failing light. 3 months passed the way summer turns to autumn on the high plains, slow and then all at once, and by the time the first frost silvered the grass outside town, Leanne Zhao's table had moved from the far end of the market, past the leather goods and the seed corn, to the very center of Main Street, a spot the town council had offered her outright after Otis Vance quietly closed his dry goods store and left Sweetwater altogether, his sawdust flour finally too well known for any customer to forgive. She had 2 new pots now, bought outright with the money her table brought in, and a line most Fridays that stretched past the bakery, townsfolk who had once eyed her cooking with suspicion, now arguing good-naturedly over whether her pork or her ginger chicken was the finer dish. The handcart had a new wheel, too, one Ezra had fitted himself over a slow Sunday afternoon though he had asked her first whether she wanted to keep the old bent one for the memory it carried, and she had told him plainly that some things were worth letting go of once they had served their purpose, and some things, like the man asking the question, were worth keeping instead. Silas, the stable hand, still traded gossip for bowls of rice, though the gossip had changed its shape entirely, less about danger trailing into town, and more about wedding dates nobody had confirmed and everybody speculated on freely. Leanne let them speculate. She had learned that a woman who answered every rumor only fed the next one, and she had better uses for her breath these days, mostly spent laughing at something Ezra said low enough that only she could hear it over the noise of the market. Ezra Colt had not left, though he had told her plainly, that morning after the fight in the street, that he intended to give her every reason to ask him to stay before he presumed to do so uninvited. He worked now for the livery at the edge of town, mending fences and breaking horses that other men called unbreakable, and every market day he stood at the corner of her table, exactly where he had stood the first day they met, though now the town watched them with something closer to warmth than suspicion. The town council, for its part, had stopped asking questions about the man who mended fences at the livery and stood at the widow's table every market day, and even the marshal, Otis Pruitt, had taken to nodding at Ezra in the street the way he nodded at any other settled man in Sweetwater, a small courtesy that meant more than most people understood. 10 cents a bowl, Leanne said to him one Friday in October, ladling pork over rice with the same steady hands she had always had, though something in her had settled that had not been settled in 2 long years. Some things are worth more than that, Ezra said, setting down his coin. You say that every week. Mean it more every week, he said, and this time, in front of the whole gathered market, he did not walk away with his bowl to eat alone at the corner of the table. He stayed beside her, the two of them working the crowd together, her cooking and his quiet steadiness, and the town of Sweetwater had long since stopped finding anything strange about the sight of them side by side, 2 people who had each buried something hard, and found, against every likelihood the frontier usually allowed, someone worth building a table for, instead of grieving alone at one. That is the whole of it, the way it was told to me. A widow who would not be run off her own table, and a man who finally found a reason to stop running altogether. Thank you for sitting with this story all the way through. If it moved you even a little, go ahead and give it a like. And if you would care to hear more stories like it from the old frontier, stay close and subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Take care of yourself, and thank you again for spending this time with me.